Introduction. The experience of meeting Paramahansa Yoganand is etched in my memory as one of the unforgettable events of my life. As I looked into his face, my eyes were almost dazzled by radiance, a light of spirituality that literally shone from him. His infinite gentleness, his gracious kindliness enveloped me like warm sunshine. I could see that his understanding and insight extended to the most mundane of problems. Even though he was a man of spirit, in him I found a true ambassador of India, carrying and spreading the essence of India's ancient wisdom to the world. Said by Dr. Binay R. Sen, former ambassador of India to the United States. To those who were personally acquainted with Paramahansa Yoganand, his own life and being were convincing testimony to the power and authenticity of the ancient wisdom he presented to the world. Countless readers of his autobiography have attested to the presence in its pages of that same light of spiritual authority that radiated from his person. Hailed as a masterpiece when it first appeared in print more than 60 years ago, the book set forth not only the story of a life of unmistakable greatness, but a fascinating introduction to the spiritual thought of the East, especially its unique signs of direct personal commune with God, opening up to the Western public a realm of knowledge hitherto accessible only to a few. Today, Autobiography of a Yogi is recognized around the world as a classic of spiritual literature. In this introduction, we would like to share some of the book's extraordinary history. The writing of the work had been professed long ago. One of the seminal figures in the renaissance of yoga in modern times, the revered 98th century master Lahari Mahasaya, had foretold about 50 years after my passing, an account of my life will be written because of a deep interest in yoga that will arise in the West. The message of yoga will encircle the globe. It will aid in establishing the brotherhood of man, a unity based on humanity's direct perception of the one Father. Many years later, Lahari Mahasaya's exalted disciple Swami Sri Yukteswar related his prophecy to Sri Yoganand. You must do your part in spreading that message, he declared, and in writing that sacred life. It was in 1945, exactly 50 years after Lahari Mahasaya's passing, that Paramahansa Yoganand completed his autobiography of a yogi, which amplified, fulfilled both of his guru's injunctions, providing the first detailed presentation in English of Lahari Mahasaya's remarkable life and introducing to a world audience India's age-old science of the soul. The creation of Autobiography of a Yogi was a project that Paramahansa Yoganand worked on over a period of many years. Sri Daya Mata, one of his earliest and closest disciples, recalls, when I came to Mount Washington in 1931, Paramahansa Ji had already begun to work on the autobiography. Once, when I was in his study attending to some secretarial duties, I was privileged to see one of the first chapters he wrote. It was on the Tiger Swami. He asked me to save it and explained that it would be going into a book he was writing. Most of the book was composed later, between 1937 and 1945. From June 1935 through October 1936, Sri Yoganand had made a return trip to India for a last visit with his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar. While there, he had compiled much factual data for the autobiography as well as stories about some of the saints and sages whom he had known and whose lives he was to describe so memorably in the book. I had never forgotten Sri Yukteswar's request that I write the life of Lahari Mahasaya, he later wrote. During my stay in India, I was taking every opportunity to contact direct disciples and relatives of Yoga Avatar. Recording their conversations in voluminous notes, I verified facts and dates and collected photographs, old letters, and documents. Upon his return to the United States at the end of 1936, he began to spend much of his time at the hermitage that had been built for him in his absence in Encinitas on the southern California coast. It proved to be an ideal place to concentrate on completing the book he had begun years before. Still vivid in my memory are the days spent in that peaceful seaside hermitage, recounts Shidaya Mata. He had so many other responsibilities and commitments that he was not able to work on the autobiography every day. But in general, he devoted the evenings to it and whatever free time he could spare. Beginning around 1939 or 40, he was able to concentrate full time on the book, and full time it was, from early morning until early morning. A small group of us disciples, Tara Mata, my sister, Ananda Mata, Shraddha Mata, and myself, were present to assist him. After each part was typed, he would give it to Tara Mata, who served as his editor. What treasured memories, as he wrote. He relived inwardly the sacred experiences he was recording. His divine intent was to share the joy and revelations encountered in the company of saints and great masters and in one's own personal realization of the divine. Often he would pause for a time, his gaze uplifted and his body motionless, wrapped in the samadhi state of deep communion with God. The whole room would be filled with a tremendously powerful aura of divine love. For us disciples, merely to be present at such times was to be lifted into a higher state of consciousness. Finally, in 1945 came the jubilant day of the book's completion. Paramahansaji wrote the last words, "Lord, thou hast given this monk a large family," then laid down his pen and joyously exclaimed, "All done. It is finished. This book will change the lives of millions. It will be my messenger when I am gone." It then became Tara Mata's responsibility to find a publisher. Paramahansa Yoganand had met Tara Mata while conducting a series of lectures and classes in San Francisco in 1924. Possessed of rare spiritual insight, she became one of the small circle of his most advanced disciples. He held her editorial abilities in highest esteem and used to say that she had one of the most brilliant minds of anyone he had ever met. He appreciated her vast knowledge and understanding of India's spiritual wisdom and remarked on one occasion, "Excepting my Guru, great Guru, Shiv Teshwarji, there is no one with whom I have ever more enjoyed talking of Indian philosophy." Tara Mata took the manuscript to New York City, but finding a publisher was not an easy task, as can often be observed. The true stature of a great work may not at first be recognized by those of a more conventional cast of mind. Despite the newly born atomic age having enlarged the collective consciousness of humanity with a growing understanding of the subtle unity of matter, energy, and thought, the publishers of the day were hardly ready for such chapters as "Materializing a Palace in the Himalayas" and "The Saints with Two Bodies." For a year, Tara Mata lived in a sparsely furnished, unheated cold water flat while making the rounds of publishing houses. At last, she was able to send a cable with news of success. The Philosophical Library, a respected New York publisher, had accepted the autobiography for publication. "What she has done for this book I cannot begin to describe," Sri Yoganand said. But for her, the book would never have gone through. Shortly before Christmas 1946, the long awaited books reached Mount Washington. The book was greeted by readers and by the world press with outpouring of appreciative praise. There has been nothing before written in English or in any other language like this presentation of yoga, wrote Columbia University Press in its review of religions. The New York Times proclaimed it a rare account. Newsweek reported Yoganand's book is rather an autobiography of the soul than of the body. It is a fascinating and clearly noted study of a religious way of life, ingeniously described in the lush style of the Orient. With the translation of the book into other languages, many more reviews began appearing in newspapers and periodicals around the world. A second edition was quickly prepared, and in 1951, a third, in addition to revisiting and updating portions of the text and deleting some passages describing organizational activities and plans that were no longer current. Paramahansa Yoganand added a final chapter, one of the longest in the book, covering the years 1940 to 1951. In a footnote to the new chapter, he wrote, "Much new material in chapter 49 has been added to the third edition of this book, 1951, in response to requests made by a number of readers of the first two editions. I have answered in this chapter various questions about India, yoga, and Vedic philosophy. I have been intensely moved," Sri Yoganand wrote in an author's note to the 1951 edition, "to receive letters from thousands of readers. Their comments and the fact that the book has been translated into many languages encourages me to believe that the West has found in these pages an affirmative answer to the question, has the ancient science of yoga any worthwhile place in the life of the modern man?" With the passing years, thousands of readers became millions, and the enduring universal appeal of Autobiography of Yogi has become increasingly apparent. 60 years after the book was first published, it is still appearing on metaphysical and inspirational bestseller list, a rare phenomenon. Available in many translations, it is now being used in colleges and universities all over the world in courses ranging from Eastern philosophy and religion to English literature, psychology, sociology, anthropology, history, and even business management. As predicted more than a century ago by Lahari Mahasaya, the message of yoga and its ancient tradition of meditation has indeed encircled the globe. Perhaps best known for his autobiography for Yogi, which has inspired countless millions around the world, writes the metaphysical journal New Frontier. Paramahansa Yoganand, like Gandhi, brought spirituality into the mainstream of society. It is reasonable to say that Yoganand did more to put the word yoga into our vocabulary than any other person. The respected scholar Dr. David Frawley, director of the American Institute of Vedic Studies, writing in the bi-monthly journal Yoga International, states, Yoganand can be said to be the father of yoga in the West. Not the mere physical yoga that has become popular, but the spiritual yoga, the science of self-realization, that is the real meaning of yoga. Professor Ashutosh Das, PhD, Doctor Literate of Calcutta University, declares Autobiography of a Yogi is regarded as an Upanishad of the New Age. It has pacified or satisfied the spiritual thirst of truth seekers throughout the world. We in India have watched with wonder and fascination the phenomenal spread of the popularity of this book about India's saints and philosophy. We have felt great satisfaction and pride that the immortal nectar of India's Sanatan Dharma, the eternal laws of truth, has been stored in the golden chalice of Autobiography of a Yogi. Even in the former Soviet Union, the book apparently made a deep impression on the relative few who had access to it under the communist regime. Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, former judge of India's Supreme Court, tells of visiting a town near St. Petersburg and asking a group of professors there whether they had thought about what happens when man dies. One of the professors quietly went inside and came out with a book. Autobiography of Yogi. I was surprised. In a country ruled by the materialistic philosophy of Marx and Lenin, here is an official of a government institute showing me Paramahansa Yoganand's book. Please realize that the spirit of India is not alien to us, he said. We accept the authenticity of everything recorded in this book. In recent years, the book has been hailed by booksellers, reviewers, and readers alike as one of the most influential spiritual books of modern times. In a 1999 HarperCollins panel of authors and scholars, Autobiography of a Yogi was selected as one of the 100 best spiritual books of the century. And in his 50 Spiritual Classics, which was released in 2005, Tom Butler Bowden wrote that the book was justifiably celebrated as one of the most entertaining and enlightening spiritual books ever written. In the book's final chapter, Paramahansa Yoganand writes one of the profound assurance which has been affirmed by saints and sages of all the world's religions down through the ages. God is love. His plan for creation can be rooted only in love. Does not that simple thought, rather than erudite reasonings, offer solace to the human heart? Every saint who has penetrated to the core of reality has testified that a divine universal plan exists and that it is beautiful and full of joy. As Autobiography of a Yogi continues in its second half century, it is our hope that all readers of this inspiring work, those who are encountering it for the first time, as well as those for whom it has become a long cherished companion on life's path, will find their own souls opening to a deeper faith in the transcendental truth that lies at the heart of life's seeming mysteries. Chapter 1: My Parents and Early Life. The characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple guru relationship. My own path led to a Christ like sage. His beautiful life was chiseled for the ages. He was one of the great masters who are India's truest wealth. Emerging in every generation, they have bulwarked their land against the fate of ancient Egypt and Babylonia. I find my earliest memories covering the anachronistic features of a previous incarnation. Clear recollections came to me of a distant life in which I had been a yogi amid the Himalayan snows. These glimpses of the past, by some dimensionless link, also afforded me a glimpse of the future. I still remember the helpless humiliations of infancy. I was resentfully conscious of being unable to walk and to express myself freely. Prayerful surges arose within me as I realized my bodily impotence. My strong emotional life was mentally expressed in words of many languages. Amid the inward confusion of tongues, I gradually became accustomed to hearing the Bengali syllables of my people. The beguiling scope of an infant's mind, adultly considered to be limited to toys and toast. Psychological ferment and my unresponsive body brought me to many obstinate crying spells. I recall the general family bewilderment at my distress. Happier memories too crowded on me, my mother's caresses and my first attempts at lisping phrase and toddling step. These early traumas, usually forgotten quickly, are yet a natural basis of self-confidence. My far-reaching memories are not unique. Many yogis are known to have retained their self-consciousness without interruption by the dramatic transition to and from life and death. If man be solely a body, its loss indeed ends its identity. But if prophets down the millennium spake with truth, man is essentially a soul, incorporeal and omnipresent. Although odd, clear memories of infancy are not extremely rare, during travels in numerous lands, I have heard very early recollections from the lips of veracious men and women. I was born on January 5, 1893 in Gorakhpur in northeastern India near the Himalaya mountains. There my first 8 years were passed. We were 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. I, Mukund Lal Ghosh. My name was changed to Yoganand in 1915 when I entered the ancient monastic Swami order. In 1935, my guru bestowed on me the further religious title of Paramahans. So, I was the second son and the fourth child. Father and mother were Bengalis of the Kshatriya caste. Both were blessed with saintly nature. Their mutual love, tranquil and dignified, never expressed itself ferociously. A perfect parental harmony was the calm center for the revolving tumult of 8 young lives. Father Bhagwati Charan Ghosh was kind, grave, at times stern, loving dearly. We children yet observed a certain reverential distance. An outstanding mathematician and logician, he was guided principally by his intellect. But mother was a queen of hearts and taught us only through love. After her death, father displayed more of his inner tenderness. I noticed then that his gaze often seemed to be metamorphosed into my mother's gaze. In mother's presence, we children made an early bittersweet acquaintance with the scriptures. Mother would resourcefully summon from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana suitable tales to meet the exigencies of discipline. On these occasions, chastisement and instruction went hand in hand. As a gesture of respect for father, in the afternoons, mother would dress us children carefully to welcome him home from the office. He held a position similar to that of a vice president in one of India's large companies, Bengal Nagpur Railway. His work involved traveling. Our family lived in several cities during my childhood. Mother held an open hand towards the needy. Father was also kindly disposed, but his respect for law and order extended to the budget. One fortnight, mother spent in feeding the poor more than father's monthly income. All I ask, please, father said, is that you keep your charities within a reasonable limit. Even a gentle rebuke from her husband was grievous to mother. Not hinting to the children at any disagreement, she ordered a hackney carriage. Goodbye. I am going away to my mother's home. Ancient ultimatum. We broke into astounded lamentations. Our maternal uncle arrived opportunely. He whispered to father some sage counsel, garnered no doubt from the ages. After father had made a few consolatory remarks, mother happily dismissed the cab. Thus ended the only trouble I ever noticed between my parents. But I recall a characteristic discussion. Please give me 10 rupees for a hapless woman who has just arrived at the house. Mother's smile had its own persuasion. Why 10 rupees? One is enough. Father added a justification. When my father and grandparents died suddenly, I had my first experience of poverty. My only breakfast before walking miles to my school was a small banana. Later at the university, I was in such need that I applied to a wealthy judge for aid of 1 rupee per month. He declined, remarking that even a rupee is important. How bitterly you recall the denial of that rupee. Mother's heart had an instant logic. Do you want this woman also to remember painfully your refusal of 10 rupees, which she needs urgently? You win. With the immemorial gesture of vanquished husbands, he opened his wallet. Here is a 10 rupee note. Give it to her with my goodwill. Father tended first to say no to any new proposal. His attitude towards the stranger, who so readily had won mother's sympathy, was an example of his customary caution. An aversion to instant acceptance is really only honoring the principle of due reflection. I always found father reasonable and evenly balanced in his judgments. If I could bluster up my numerous requests with one or two good arguments, he would invariably put within my reach the coveted good, whether a vacation trip or a new motor bicycle. Father was a strict disciplinarian to his children in their earliest, but his attitude towards himself was truly Spartan. He never visited the theatre, for instance, but sought his recreation in various spiritual practices and reading the Bhagavad Gita. Shunning all luxuries, he would cling to one old pair of shoes until they were useless. His sons bought automobiles after they came into popular use, but father was content with the trolley car for his daily ride to the office. Father was not interested in the accumulation of money for the sake of power. On one occasion, after he had organized the Calcutta Urban Bank, he refused to benefit himself by holding any of its shares. He simply wished to perform a civic duty in his spare time. Several years after father had retired on a pension, an accountant from England came to India to examine the books of Bengal Nagpur Railway. The amazed investigator discovered that father had never applied for overdue bonuses. He did the work of 3 men, the accountant told the company. He has rupees 1,25,000 owing to him as back compensation. The treasurer sent father a check for that amount. My parent thought so little about the matter that he forgot to mention it to the family. Much later, he was questioned by my youngest brother Vishnu, who had noticed the large deposit on a bank statement. Why be elated by material profit? Father replied. That one who pursues a goal of even mindedness is neither jubilant with gain nor depressed by loss. He knows that man arrives penniless in this world and departs without a single rupee. Early in their married life, my parents became disciples of a great master, Lahari Mahasaya of Banaras. This association strengthened father's naturally ascetical temperament. Mother once made a remarkable admission to my eldest sister Roma. Your father and I sleep together as men and women only once a year for the purpose of having children. Father met Lahari Mahasaya through Abhinash Babu, an employee of a branch line of Bengal Nagpur Railway. In Gorakhpur, Abhinash Babu instructed my young years with engrossing tales of many Indian saints. He invariably concluded with a tribute to the superior glories of his own guru. Did you ever hear of the extraordinary circumstances under which your father became a disciple of Lahari Mahasaya? It was on a lazy summer afternoon, as Abhinash and I sat together in the compound of my home, that he put his intriguing questions. I shook my head with a smile of anticipation. Years ago, before you were born, I asked my superior officer, your father, to give me a week's leave from my office duties in order to visit my guru in Banaras. Your father ridiculed my plan. Are you going to become a religious fanatic? He inquired. Concentrate on your work of office if you want to forge ahead. Sadly, walking home along a woodland path that day, I met your father in a palanquin. He dismissed his servants and conveyance and fell into step beside me. Seeking to console me, he pointed out the advantages of striving for worldly success. But I heard him listlessly. My heart was repeating, Lahari Mahasaya, I cannot live without seeing you. Our path took us to the edge of a tranquil field where the rays of the late afternoon sun were crowning the tall ripple of a wild grass. We paused in admiration. There in the field, only a few yards from us, the form of my great guru suddenly appeared. Bhagwati, you are too hard on your employer. His voice was resonant in our astounded ears. He vanished as mysteriously as he had come. On my knees, I was exclaiming, Lahari Mahasaya, Lahari Mahasaya. For a few moments, your father was motionless with sportification. Abhinash, not only do I give you leave, but I give myself leave to start for Banaras tomorrow. I must know this great Lahari Mahasaya who is able to materialize himself at will in order to intercede you. I will take my wife and ask this master to initiate us in his spiritual path. Will you guide us to him? Of course. Joy filled me at the miraculous answer to my prayer and the quick favorable turn of events. The next evening, your parents and I entrained for Banaras. Reaching there on the following day, we took a horse cart for some distance, then had to walk through narrow lanes to my guru's secluded home. Entering his little parlour, we bowed before the master and locked in his habitual lotus posture. He blinked his piercing eyes and levelled them on your father. Bhagwati, you're too hard on your employee. His words were the same as those he had used 2 days before in the grassing field. He added, I am glad that you have permitted Abhinash to visit me and that you and your wife have accompanied him. To their joy, he initiated your parents in the spiritual practice of Kriya Yoga. Your father and I, as brother disciples, have been close friends since the memorable day of the vision. Lahari Mahasaya took a definite interest in your own birth. Your life shall surely be linked with his own. The Master's blessing never fails. Lahari Mahasaya left this world shortly after I had entered it. His picture in an ornate frame always graced our family altar in the various cities to which father was transferred by his office. Many a morning and evening found mother and me meditating before an improvised shrine, offering flowers dipped in fragrant sandalwood paste. With Frankness and Myra, as well as our united devotions, we honored the divinity that had found full expression in Lahari Mahasaya. His picture had a surpassing influence over my life. As I grew, the thought of the Master grew in me. In meditation, I would often see his photographic image emerge from his small frame and taking a living form sit before me. When I attempted to touch the feet of his luminous body, it would change and again become the picture. As childhood slipped into boyhood, I found Lahari Mahasaya transformed in my mind from a little image cribbed in a frame to a living, enlightening presence. I frequently prayed to him in moments of trial or confusion, finding within me his solacing direction. At first, I cried because he was no longer physically living. As I began to discover his secret omnipresence, I lamented no more. He had often written to those of his disciples who were over anxious to see him. Why come to view my flesh and bones when I am ever within range of your touched spiritual side? At about the age of 8, I was blessed with a wonderful healing through the photograph Lahari Mahasaya. This experience gave intensification of my love. While at our family estate in Ichhapur, Bengal, I was stricken with Asiatic cholera. My life was despaired of. The doctors could do nothing. At my bedside, mother frankly motioned me to look at Lahari Mahasaya's picture on the wall above my head. Bow to him mentally. She knew I was too feeble even to lift my hands in salutation. If you really show your devotion and inwardly kneel before him, your life will be spared. I gazed at his photograph and saw there a blinding light, enveloping my body and the entire room. My nausea and other uncontrollable symptoms disappeared. I was well. At once, I felt strong enough to bend over and touch mother's feet in appreciation of her immeasurable faith in her Guru. Mother pressed her head repeatedly against the little picture. O omnipresent Master, I thank thee that thy light hath healed my son. I realized that she too had witnessed the luminous blaze through which I had instantly recovered from a usually fatal disease. One of my most precious possessions is that same photograph, given to Father by Lahari Mahasaya himself. It carries a holy vibration. The picture had a miraculous origin. I heard the story from Father's brother disciple Kali Kumar Roy. It appears that the master had an aversion to being photographed. Over his protest, a picture was once taken of him and a group of devotees, including Kali Kumar Roy. It was an amazed photographer who discovered that the plate, which had clear images of all the disciples, revealed nothing more than a blank space in the center where he had reasonably expected to find the outlines of Lahari Mahasaya. The phenomenon was widely discussed. A student who was an expert photographer, Gangadhar Babu, boasted that the fugitive figure would not escape him. The next morning, as the Guru sat in lotus posture on a wooden bench with a screen behind him, Gangadhar Babu arrived with his equipment. Taking every precaution for success, he greedily exposed 12 pages. On each one, he soon found the imprint of the wooden bench and screen. But once again, the master's form was missing. With tears and shattered pride, Gangadhar Babu sought out his Guru. It was many hours before Lahari Mahasaya broke his silence with pregnant comment. I am spirit. Can your camera reflect the omnipresent invisible? I see it cannot. But, holy sir, I lovingly desired a picture of your bodily temple. My vision has been narrow. Until today, I had not realized that in you the spirit fully dwells. Come then tomorrow morning. I will pose for you. Again, the photographer focused his camera. This time, the sacred figure, not cloaked with mysterious impossibility, was sharp on the plate. The master never posed for another picture. At least I have seen none. The photograph is reproduced in this book. Lahari Ma shares fair features of a universal caste, hardly suggests to what race he belonged. The joy of God communion is slightly revealed in his enigmatic smile. His eyes, half open to denote a nominal interest in the outer world, are also half closed, indicating his absorption in inner bliss. Oblivious of the pure or poor lures of the earth, he was fully awake at all times to the spiritual problems of seekers who approached for his botany. Shortly after my healing through potency of the Guru's picture, I had influential spiritual vision. Sitting on my bed one morning, I fell into a deep reverie. What is behind the darkness of closed eyes? This probing thought came powerfully into my mind. An immense flash of light at once manifested into my inner gaze. Divine shapes of saints sitting in meditation posture in mountain caves formed like miniature cinema pictures on the large screen of radiance within my forehead. Who are you? I spoke aloud. We are the Himalayan yogis. The celestial response is difficult to describe. My heart was thrilled. Ah, I long to go to the Himalayas and become like you. The vision vanished, but the silvery beams expanded in ever widening circles to infinity. What is this wondrous glow? I am Ishwar, I am light. The voice was as murmuring clouds. I want to be one with thy. Out of the slow dwindling of my divine ecstasy, I salvaged a permanent legacy of inspiration to seek God, His eternal, ever new joy. This memory persisted long after the day of rapture. And the early recollection is outstanding, and literally so, for I bear the scar to this day. My elder sister Uma and I were seated in the early morning under a neem tree in our Gorakhpur compound. She was helping me in my study of a Bengali primer. What time I could spare my gaze from the nearby parrots eating ripe margosa fruit. Uma complained of a boil on her leg. Fetched a jar of ointment. I smeared a bit of the salve on my forearm. Why do you use medicine on a healthy arm? Well, sis, I feel I'm going to have a boil tomorrow. I'm testing your ointment on the spot where the boil will appear. You little liar. Sis, don't call me a liar until you see what happens in the morning. Indignation filled me. Oma, unimpressed, thrice repeated her taunt. An adamant resolution sounded in my eyes as I made slow reply. By the power of will in me, I say that tomorrow I shall have a fairly large boil in this exact place on my arm, and your boil shall swell to twice its present size. Morning found me with a stalwart boil on the indicated spot. The dimensions of Uma's boil had doubled. With a strike, my sister rushed to mother. Mukund has become a necromancer. Gravely, mother instructed me never to use the power of words for doing harm. I have always remembered her counsel and followed it. My boil was surgically treated. A noticeable scar left by the doctor incision is present today. On my right forearm is a constant reminder of the power in man's sheer word. Those simple and apparently harmless phrases to Uma, spoken with deep concentration, has possessed sufficient hidden force to explode like bombs and to produce definite, though injurious effects. I understood later that the explosive vibratory power in speech could be wisely directed to free one's life from difficulties and thus operate without scar or rebuke. Our family moved to Lahore in the Punjab. There I acquired a picture of the Divine Mother in the form of Goddess Kali. It signified a small informal shrine on the balcony of her room. An unequal conviction came over me that fulfillment would crown any of my prayers uttered in that sacred spot. Standing there with Uma one day, I watched two boys flying kites over the roof of two buildings that were separated from our house by an extremely narrow lane. Why are you so quiet? Uma pushed me playfully. I'm just thinking how wonderful it is that Divine Mother gives me whatever I ask. I suppose she would give you those two kites, my sister laughed derisively. Why not? I began silent prayers for their possession. Matches are played in India with kites whose strings are covered with glue and ground glass. Each player attempts to sever the string held by his opponent. A freed kite sails over the roof. There is a great fun in catching it. As Uma and I were on the roof recessed balcony, it seemed impossible that a loose kite would come into our hands. Its string would naturally dangle over the roof. The players across the lane began their match. One string was cut. Immediately the kite floated in my direction. Owing to a sudden abatement of the breeze, the kite remained stationary for a moment, during which its string became firmly entangled with a cactus plant on top of the opposite house. A long, perfect loop was formed for my seizure. I handed the prize to Uma. It was just an extraordinary accident and not an answer to your prayer. If the other kite comes to you, then I shall believe. Sister's dark eyes conveyed more amazement than her words. I continued my prayers with intensity. A forcible tug by the other player resulted in the abrupt loss of his sight. It headed towards me, dancing in the wind. My helpful assistant, the cactus plant, again secured the kite string in the necessary loop by which I could grasp it. I presented my second trophy to Ma. Indeed, Divine Mother listens to you. This is all too uncanny for me. Sister bolted away like a frightened fawn.